Idilično, nedjeljno poslijepodne na ribarskoj tvrđavi, jednom od najpoznatijih budimpeštanskih spomenika, s mjesta na kojemu 7 visokih kamenih tornjeva simbolizira 7 plemena koja su naselila Panonsku nizinu u 9. stoljeću, puca pogled na Dunav. I na zgradu Mađarskog parlamenta, u kojemu se donose zakoni Orbanova i liberalnog svijeta. U politološkim udžbenicima, tvrde njegovi kritičari, to se naziva zarobljena država.
A lot of scholars, also the European Parliament, said that Hungary is an electoral autocracy, that we cannot describe it as a democracy anymore. From the perspective of a human rights organization, sadly, I have to agree, all the main features of a developed European democracy are under pressure. And we see these core institutions and the values of democracy and the rule of law in Hungary being eroded.
It is not a dictatorship, it's a autocracy, and the forms of suppression are very different from the open terror. There is no. It resembles much more to that what we can witness in the wrestling for the chokehold, you know. It means that if you do not move, you can brass, but if you start to move, you cannot brass.
Autor knjige Postkomunistička mafijaška država, slučaj Mađarske, koji je u 2 navrata bio ministar kulture, reći će da se s prvom Orbanovom vladom Mađarskoj dogodio autokratski pokušaj. S drugom, koja traje već 14 godina, autokratski proboj, nakon što je Fides i zbog neproporcionalnog izbornog sustava dograbio parlamentarnu supervećinu.
It meant that they could alone change the constitution and all laws on one hand. On the other hand, they could appoint all the heads of those institutions which should serve as the institutions of checks and balances. So at that time, the Hungarian autocracy was born, and the third phase started, the so-called autocratic consolidation, when they practically invaded all spheres of the society, not only the political one, but the economic, the communal one, media, etc.
Vladavina prava kao da je potopljena negdje duboko u koritu druge najduže europske rijeke. Do drugog Orbanova dolaska na vlast 2010. korupcija je bila pogreška sustava, a otad je postala njegov sastavni dio. Europska unija pokušava na režim utjecati zamrzavanjem novca iz europskih fondova. Pitanje je s koliko uspjeha.
This has become a daily reality, I think, in Hungary, that people understand that the government is corrupt. I think there's a pretty general understanding about this in the Hungarian population, going beyond party lines. And the key is to make sure that people understand that these EU funds, based on rule of law breaches, are tied to this corruption, so that it's not Brussels against Hungarians, but rather government against rule of law.
Prema indeksu percepcije korupcije, globalno najraširenijem načinu njezina mjerenja, Mađarska je najkorumpiranija zemlja Europske unije. Uz iznimno centraliziranu korupciju, budući da je takav i politički sustav, kao i ekonomija.
Hungarian corruption can be described by this phenomenon, which is called state capture, and the Hungarian state was captured several years ago by an informal network of politicians and government close oligarchs.
Veliki igrači lojalni vladajućima su nedodirljivi, poručuju antikorupcijske organizacije, pune džepove s novcem poreznih obveznika. Samo jedna posljedica preuzimanja, a potom pražnjenja od sadržaja ili potpune kontrole nad institucijama koje bi trebale biti korektiv vlasti.
Even if we have an independent judiciary, if the prosecution service does not comply with its constitutional role and it does not bring corruption cases to the courts, then corruption will never be investigated properly.
Practically, the separation of branches of power, they are abolished and is concentrated into the hand of the chief patron. So Viktor Orban not only controls the executive power, but the legislation, judiciary, and other institutions as well, as the state account office or the chief attorney's office and all other things. And all these organizations are under his control and leadership, practically abolishes the institutions of checks and balances.
Orbanovi protivnici današnju Mađarsku nazivaju pokroviteljskom autokracijom, u kojoj su dva nosiva stupa koncentrirana politička moć i akumulacija osobnog i obiteljskog bogatstva, s vladajućom elitom, ustrojenom kao političko-ekonomski klan, kojemu je na čelu glavni pokrovitelj, donosi sve odluke jer su poluge države izmještene iz formalnih institucija u njegov dvor.
A special form of patron autocracy is a post-communist mafia state when I would say that Hungary does not have a government, but it has a criminal organization. So when we are speaking about corruption, just the name corruption is very misleading because most of the people, even if the corruption is endemic, they cannot make a difference between endemic and systemic corruption. Can be corruption endemic, for example, in Romania and Bulgaria as well, but it does not mean that the whole governance is operated as a criminal organization. And what happens in Hungary is that one, and this is a special form of criminal organization.
It's not by chance that apart from those countries who are not part of the Schengen Treaty, only two countries, Poland and Hungary, remained out or opted out from the EPPO, and by now Poland has already signed with the new government to join, and Hungary remains the only country which is outside and which on the other hand part of the Schengen Treaty.
Nakon više od desetljeća potkopavanja vladavine prava, lani su u Budimpešti napravljeni znatni pomaci, tvrdi Europska komisija. Dovoljni da pod pritiskom Orbanova veta, kada je u pitanju daljna financijska pomoć Unije Ukrajini, odbrzne nešto više od 10 milijardi eura iz europskih kohezijskih fondova, od ukupno 27 koliko je bilo na ledu. Pravosudna reforma po volji Brisela sastoji se od 4 elementa. Jedan od njih jest jačanje neovisnosti kurije, Mađarskog vrhovnog suda.
The problem here was that the Curia was managed or governed by a political appointee who was appointed as Curia president based on personalized legislation and in opposition by the judges, because he had no judicial background before. So he was parachuted practically to the top of the Hungarian judicial system. And he had overall powers to administrate these courts, and we have seen a lot of abusive court management practices which were concerning with respect to the judicial independence.
Ojačano je i Nacionalno pravosudno vijeće, uklonjene zapreke koje su priječile mađarskim sucima da se obrate Sudu pravde EU-a. Kako bi se odbrznuo i novac iz mehanizma za oporavak i otpornost, Mađarska mora napraviti pozamašnu domaću zadaću. Ispuniti 17 smjernica iz takozvanog mehanizma uvjetovanosti, te dodatnih 10 koje se nazivaju i super smjernice. Pokrivaju neka od područja antikorupcijske borbe, poput javne nabave ili prijave dužnosničke imovine.
As of now, we do not see many improvements, so at least we do not see a breakthrough in order to fight against corruption and in order to establish at least parts of the rule of law in this country. We see some baby steps in that direction, but we do not see the breakthrough.
Ez itt a Klubrádió, az Esti Gyors.
Oni su ogledan primjer Orbanova obračuna s nepočudnim medijima. Krimen im je bio bavljenje profesionalnim novinarstvom, nizom administrativnih manevara, vlada radijskoj postaji Klub uoči parlamentarnih izbora 2022. nije produžila frekvenciju. Iscrpili su sve mogućnosti na mađarskim sudovima. Njihov slučaj sada je na Europskom sudu za ljudska prava i sudu Europske unije.
The real wonder that we still exist, because we decided instead of broadcasting analog on a frequency where we reached about maximum 3 million people. I don't say that 3 million people were listening to Klub Radio a day, but we could reach in Budapest and in its radius about 3 million people. Now we continue broadcasting on the internet 24/7, and I think we did not lose, rather we could expand our audience.
Novinari mađarskih neovisnih medija teško ulaze na vladine novinske konferencije. Ministri se nikad ne odazivaju njihovim pozivima za komentar ili gostovanje. S time su suočeni i na najpopularnijem YouTube političkom kanalu u zemlji, nazvanom Partizan. Imaju otprilike 450.000 pretplatnika i više od 4,5 milijuna gledatelja mjesečno. Financiraju se uz pomoć i 1000 mikrodonacija. Svoj golem uspjeh i sami priznaju duguju i nevjerodostojnim provladinim medijima.
Every daily newspapers outside of the capital is right now owned by one conglomerate which is directly connected to the government. So right now daily newspapers independent from the government outside of the capital is non-existent in this country.
540 različitih medijskih kuća iznenada je naime 2018. u jednom danu odlučilo darivati svoje vlasništvo medijskom konglomeratu kojega kontrolira vlada. Nastala je tako KEŠMA, čiji akronim u prijevodu znači Srednja Europska zaklada za medije. Mnogi su taj manevar lišen svake tržišne logike doživjeli kao vrhunac ciljene kupnje medijskih kuća od strane provladinih oligarha, koje su potom stavljene pod jedan mega kišobran.
They donated their companies for free, which is totally absurd, and we know that it cannot happen in the business, and it cannot happen with a real owner. So they offered their media companies to this foundation. This foundation is clearly related to the government, and basically it created the most concentrated media market in the European Union.
What is the most astonishing phenomenon that we have like 18 local county newspapers, and 8 pages of these county newspapers are being centrally edited from Budapest. So it's like a Soviet type propaganda machine where the information can be only coming from the center. Unbelievable. So this is something that in a normal country where the government does not control the competition office, it would be an absolute no-go. But in Hungary, even the competition office is subordinated to the government. It's run by friends of the prime minister, so they didn't say a word.
Also, they are spending an enormous amount of money through revenues, ad revenues, to these news outlets in order to make them sustainable, to make them, going on and spreading these false propaganda provided by the government as well.
Klub Radio has practically no access to advertising because half of the market is run by state-owned companies like the National Lottery or the National Railways or the Gasworks, etc., etc. The other is run by private enterprises, but these private companies, even foreign companies like Mercedes-Benz or Audi, understand the message of the government. And they don't want to lose the tax breaks that they get from the government, and they do not want to have extraordinary tax audits or competition office investigation, etc., etc. So they understood the message and they are simply not advertising. So the whole advertising market has dried out for the independent media.
U lanjskom izvješću reportera bez granica o slobodi medija, gora od Mađarske u Europskoj uniji bila je samo Grčka. Procjene govore da je 80% mađarskih medija pod skutima države.
I would say 80% is the lowest estimate. I would say 95% of the media is either owned by the government or friends and relatives of Prime Minister Orban or business circles, or directly governed by the government. This is the so-called public service media, which does not exist. It's a propaganda mouthpiece of the government for long years now, for 14 years now.
The public service media has been quite taken over and turned into a propaganda machine. This is from my taxpayer money that I have to hear very often Russian-influenced messaging, messaging that absolutely fails to present a variety of views in the Hungarian public.
In the election campaign last time in 2022 and national elections, parliament elections, the whole opposition coalition got only once 5 minutes together in the state-owned television for presenting their programs, nothing else.
Those people who get the same narrative from the local radio station, regional newspaper, public service media, they really accept this narrative and they really believe in Orban just like in a god. So it is very absurd and there is no rationality, of course, but the political communication is much more about the emotions and ideologies, and the ruling party is very successful in this communication.
U siječnju prošle godine Viktor Orban u jednom radijskom intervjuu poručuje kako Mađarska treba novi zakon koji će spriječiti strano financiranje ovdjašnjih političkih stranaka, nevladinih udruga ili medija. I onda je već u prosincu 2023. Mađarski parlament, u kojemu Orbanov Fides ima dvotrećinsku većinu, izglasao zakon o obrani nacionalnog suvereniteta, koji će sve one koje režim smatra neprijateljima zapravo žigosati kao strane agente. Novoosnovani Ured za zaštitu suvereniteta, naravno čelnog čovjeka bira mađarska vlada, ima pravo istraživati sve primatelje stranih donacija. Od takvih pojedinaca ili organizacija, ali i od mađarskih obavještajnih službi može zatražiti javno dostupne, ali i privatne informacije. Orbanovi neistomišljenici ovdje na Dunavu, ali i u njemu omraženom Briselu, u tome su prepoznali dolazak vjetrova iz Rusije, u kojoj Vladimir Putin odavno provodi takve i liberalne, rigidne zakone.
I don't feel myself as a foreign agent, and I think that's a very cheap excuse coming from the government which buys directly through their oligarchs, newspapers and media in the region, in Slovenia, in Croatia as well, I think, but I can say with confidence that they bought media in Slovenia, in Slovakia. They are openly campaigning in favor of candidates running for offices in these countries. So when a government which is heavily presented and influencing the political landscape and the political life in these countries, and they are blaming newspapers in their home country of, I don't know, harming the sovereignty of the nation, I think it's a joke.
Zakon o zaštiti suvereniteta usvojen je inače u mađarskom parlamentu netom prije nego li je Europska komisija odlučila odmrznuti dio novca za Mađarsku iz EU fondova. Mnoge obrisi tog zakona podsjećaju na Orwellovu 84. ali i olovne godine komunizma, kada je druženje sa strancima smatrano prijetnjom.
National sovereignty would be lying in a fair judicial system with a rule of law, with media freedom, etc. But they don't understand, they don't speak that language because they don't want to. Everything is governed by one idea, keeping Mr. Orban and his other people in the government at whatever costs. They have no ideology, they don't care about anything else, only in keeping and retaining the power.
When they are speaking about sovereignty of the nation, it doesn't mean the sovereignty of Hungary. It means the sovereignty and impunity of a criminal organization. This is why the so-called sovereignty is important for them. This is why Hungary does not join to the European Chief Attorney's Office, and this is why they are fighting against very much. And this is a real difference between the two types of autocratic attempt and autocratization between the Polish and the Hungarian one. Kaczynski was an ideology-led person, an autocrat but not a criminal. Orban is an autocrat and a criminal, and it's a huge difference.
Since 2016, we've had various types of emergency or extraordinary legal regimes in place. First, it was because of the migration situation that in certain areas the government can diverge from the regular procedures. During the corona crisis, of course, government needed to take fast action. That is without a doubt. But the Hungarian government decided to use this to exploit this situation and to broaden what it can do by creating basically a rule by decree regime. And this in new forms now because of the war going on against Ukraine and the neighboring country. Now this extraordinary regime is still in place.
Autonomija akademske zajednice postoji još samo u tragovima. 21 javno sveučilište pretvoreno je u zaklade kojima upravljaju odbori čije članove izravno bira vlast. Kontrolirana sveučilišta kao rasadnici Orbanove kulturne agende o kojoj je toliko puta govorio.
Putting on top of universities a political body, a politically appointed body that disposes of resources will make university administrations understand what kind of space they can inhibit and where are the lines which they should not be crossing. This is a sentiment that Hungarians, of course, know well because this was the 70s and the 80s. There is only so far you can go. If you transgress a certain line, there will be something happening to you.
On nije dopustio izlazak na ispit studenta koji zato nije imao uvjete, usprkos pritiscima njegovih roditelja i nadređenih rektora i dekanice. Ali otac oligarh umrežen je s vladajućom elitom, pa je u konačnici student položio ispit kod same dekanice. Zoltan Adam pokrenuo je etičke procedure unutar sveučilišta, a onda je u konačnici u kafkijanskom postupku on sam kažnjen trenutačnim otkazom.
My university, Corvinus University of Budapest, is practically controlled by MOL and the management of MOL, who are the employers of the highest ranking university managers, the three highest ranking persons in the university leadership, the rector, the chairman or president and the chancellor. They are all employed directly by the trust, the public trust fund, which is chaired by Mr. Hernadi, so that there's a direct employer-employee relationship there. And at the top of that, the most important source of revenue of the university is the share, the MOL shares, the MOL and Richter shares in the particular case, but MOL is the larger chunk of the wealth of the public trust fund. The university was allocated by government, and after the shares, the university receives a dividend. So MOL employs the leadership of the university, and also from the MOL profit through the dividends of the shares, the university is getting finance. So both financially and administratively, the university is fully controlled by the MOL leadership.
Državna imovina zapravo je pretvorena u privatnu. Takva sveučilišta ne mogu sudjelovati u programima Europske unije, Erasmus i Obzor, pa su i studenti i predavači zakinuti. Da se u Mađarskoj ne poštuje akademska sloboda, misle i u Europskom parlamentu.
In a liberal democratic regime, I suppose you want universities to create an elite which will run a liberal democratic country. You know, if you are running an illiberal regime, then probably you want to educate your future elite to be able to run an illiberal government, an illiberal state, ideologically well-trained to do that and affiliated to the regime. So there is this kind of elite, recruitment purpose.
When they abolished the autonomy of the universities and they abolished the autonomy of research institutes, and they are fighting against any other independent funding of these institutions, just having government fundings, for them, then this is a special way of censorship.
The Gender Studies Masters were banned in 2017, which very much ties into his narrative of fighting against gender propaganda in every way. So this means that they are refusing to ratify the Istanbul Convention as well, because it mentions the word gender, even though it primarily focuses on domestic abuse that women are suffering from.
U ionako polariziranom mađarskom društvu, tvrde u jednoj od najvidljivijih LGBTQI organizacija, postali smo novi žrtveni jarci Orbanova režima, poput Roma ili migranata prije nas. U Zakon o zaštiti djece unesena je naime odredba o zabrani izloženosti maloljetnika bilo kakvom LGBTQI sadržaju.
So what this means in practice is that any kind of sex education workshops or bullying prevention or any kind of workshops that would help with dealing with bullying is basically banned from the schools because you would need a special permission, but you cannot get it. When it comes to media, any kind of content that promotes, as they say, LGBTQI identities can only be shown or broadcasted between 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. in the morning, which is the same time slot as for horror movies, for example.
Hungary has been inspired by the Russian gay propaganda law and has enacted something quite similar in the European Union, where tolerance and equality is a value and where human rights are afforded to everybody. The Hungarian law says that the public portrayal of certain groups within society is harmful, and so we should be shielded from it. Members of our own society are portrayed as being harmful and should be basically blurred out of view.
Vlasti su otišle toliko daleko da se knjige u kojima se pojavljuju LGBTQI likovi mogu prodavati u knjižarama samo ako su posebno upakirane. Ne mogu biti izložene u izlozima knjižara, ne mogu se prodavati u radijusu od 200 metara od vjerskih ili obrazovnih institucija.
Of course, it is a blatant attack against marginalized and very vulnerable minorities, such as the LGBTQ people. This law practically puts together pedophilia or makes equal pedophilia and the LGBTQ world. We are very happy that this was obvious from the first moment for the European Commission, and they decided to initiate an infringement proceeding because it was a very blatant attack against the fundamental right of LGBTQ people.
The infringement procedure has been very quick from the European Commission. I think it was one of the quickest cases that we have ever seen, and there has been 15 member states who have joined the infringement procedure, which is a historically high number. So I think that there is a clear initiative from a lot of the member states to absolutely proclaim that LGBTQI rights are human rights. The European Parliament has also joined the infringement procedure on the Commission side. So those are historic steps that we are very happy for.
Kako bi dobio potvrdu ispravnosti donošenja zakona o zaštiti djece na domaćem terenu, Orban je istovremeno s parlamentarnim izborima 2022. održao i referendum o tom zakonu, niti godinu dana nakon što je on stupio na snagu. Nevladine udruge uspjele su međutim u naumu da referendum učine nevažećim. Gotovo 2 milijuna Mađara odazvalo se njihovu apelu i neispravno ispunilo glasački listić.
Despite the fact that in the past 40 years he became more and more strongly anti-LGBTQ, surveys show that the people are more and more supportive towards, for example, marriage equality, the equality and the right for male persons or female persons to marry with a male person or a female person from their same sex. So same-sex marriage has higher support right now in Hungary than it had, I don't know, 10 years ago.
Since 2020, there have been a number of anti-LGBTQI laws passed in Hungary. The first one was a ban on legal gender recognition for trans and intersex people that has been previously possible in the country for 2 decades. So for 20 years it has been running completely seamlessly, and then they banned it in 2020. Then they also changed the adoption laws so that as an individual it is much harder to adopt. It has never been possible to adopt jointly as an LGBTQI couple, but you could adopt as a single person, as an individual, and then the other parent wouldn't be a legal parent or a legal guardian according to the paperwork. However, what happens now is if that you are not a married person, but an individual, then you need a special permission from a ministry who review your file after you got the go-ahead from the Child Protection Services. And this has been in effect for 3 years now, and we don't know of a single LGBTQI person who has received this special permission.
This government says that it is always protecting the family values, the traditional Christian values, etc. And it turns out that there were cases of pedophilia that were somehow linked to government circles, and even perpetrators of pedophilia were getting amnesty from the President of the Republic. She and the Minister of Justice, ex-Minister of Justice, had to resign from all public offices because they were involved.
While the propaganda messages are all about how Hungary is a great place for children and families, you arrive at the airport. This is the first sign that greets you that this is a family-friendly place. Turns out that the political and personal interests have absolutely overridden the interest of protecting children against abuse. And the political cover-up has been sustained to the highest level.
Iako su slučajevi očitog licemjerja razočarali mnoge Fidesove birače, teško da će to smanjiti visok postotak podrške Orbanu, najdugovječnijem europskom premijeru.
Do you know how much percentage Mr. Putin received at the election over the weekend? I think 88%. I mean, autocrats can orchestrate elections in which they receive very high percentage of the vote. Which I'm not saying that this is like the Putin regime. This is a much more free, much freer, if you like, regime than Putin's Russia. No doubt. I mean, no one is killed, no one is incarcerated, as far as I know, for political reasons.
Those people who criticize the government and have a different kind of way of thinking about values, they are traitors, foreign agents, Soros agents, dollar left or dollar media. So it is just a communication narrative, of course, but unfortunately it is rather efficient in the society.
There is no migration aimed at Hungary. It might be only transiting. That Brussels is the main enemy. George Soros wants to kill us. And there is the gender lobby who is threatening our kids, blah, blah, blah. And Prime Minister Orban will come and save you like a hussar from all these dangers. This is how it is portrayed in the government propaganda.
U cementiranju svoje pozicije, Orban vješto koristi sklonost Mađara da se tijekom povijesti bore protiv imperijalnog stranog centra moći. U vrijeme Habsburške monarhije bio je to Beč. Danas je za mnoge to mrski Brisel, koji želi nametnuti svoja pravila igre. Orban najavljuje marš na središte Unije kako bi branio mađarsku slobodu i suverenost, kaže.
I think what he wants to do is to make sure that these rule of law criteria are going to be less strict. And that has to happen through going to Brussels, overtaking Brussels, eroding the EU standards.
His anti-EU agenda has been around for 13 years. First time he said it on March the 15th, it's a national holiday, 2011, where he compared the European Union to the Soviet Union. But it's a very easy target. That's their communication strategy, saying that the poor Hungarians are being oppressed by the others, and those others are being the European Union. And he always paints the devil on the wall, and this is George Soros, these are the migrants, and this is the EU. The EU will never come to Budapest and complain that you are talking bullshit about me. So the enemies are always either unseen or very far away. So these are the enemies he's fighting for on the propaganda level.
Ironično, upravo je milijardama novca iz EU fondova u 14 godina vlasti Orban učvrstio temelje svog režima. Što više, armirao ih je u krugu povlaštenih. Oko 11% svih javnih nabava primjerice, a one se 50 do 60% preklapaju s dodjelom europskog novca, dobivaju tvrtke samo dviju osoba, bliskih vlastima, naravno.
Public procurement system as well as the distribution of EU money has been for many, many years a hotbed of corruption in this country. Unfortunately, lots of money, in our estimation approximately 30% of the total amount of EU money, at least 30%, went unduly to the hands of cronies and government close stakeholders.
Narod ipak shvaća kolika je mađarska korist od EU članstva. Više od 3/4 stanovništva i dalje podupire Europsku uniju. Na Dan Europe u Budimpešti je svake godine svečano kao i u drugim europskim prijestolnicama, retorici s najviših razina unatoč.
The decision-making mechanism of the whole EU is based on that they are the group of liberal democracies, and they could not imagine what's going on here. And now I think that they start to feel that experience, what you could see from some American films, that sleeping in one bed with the enemy.
We are fighting with Orban because he looks like a kind of a bad pupil in the classroom. But on the other hand, Orban is a great ally of the EU because, for example, he's a great ally of German car factories. He's a great ally because he brought all the South Asian battery companies into the country, which are important in order to the green transition, which is important for the EU countries. And right now the batteries are produced in Hungary, which is very, it's a dangerous thing. It's polluting the air, it's polluting the water, it's polluting actually those cities where these factories are built up. So right now I think Orban on the surface, it's a kind of a bad sheep of the EU community, but in reality he's a great ally of Germany, France and all of the core countries, and he delivers a lot. So for example, Hungary has the lowest level of taxation on companies, which is absolutely a scandal, but right now it plays into the hands of the German and France capitals.
Because of a lot of dirty corrupt businesses, Orban is not an autonomous politician. He is tied very closely to Putin and Russia, and therefore it's an unequal situation between them, while Orban is paid practically financially through Gazprom diplomacy and other things by the Russians, until he pays Putin with his illoyalty towards the EU and subversing the EU's institutions.
I find this very, very alarming that in 2024, we Hungarians are being told by our government and by the government propaganda that NATO and European Union are basically not aligned with our own interests. These are the alliances that Hungary is part of, but we seem to be turning our backs on this.
I think he lost one momentum, and that's the avalanche effect, that all these small crimes against the European Union, all these small attacks are getting bigger, bigger, bigger and bigger, and once it will cover Orban underneath. So I'm sure that this will happen.
Mnogi u Budimpešti Uniji zamjeraju na sporosti. Cijelo desetljeće trebalo im je da se prenu i priznaju koliko je ozbiljna situacija u Mađarskoj, kažu. Frustrirani su i činjenicom da Unija zapravo nema mehanizama za učinkovito kažnjavanje Orbana.
I think prime ministers should express clearly what they think about European values under threat in Hungary. So we cannot turn a blind eye to this. We cannot sidestep this issue anymore. We have to really call out. This is the kind of support I think Hungarians need to have a consistent, clear message from other European leaders and societies.
The European Union will not do, so to say, the dirty work for us. If we don't force this government to change its policy or don't force this group out of power, then we deserve it. The European Union cannot do this work instead of us.
U politiku je krenuo mlad, kao ultraliberal, suosjećan, kažu dobri poznavatelji njegova lika i djela. U makijavelističkoj preobrazbi pomicao se potom prema centru, pa na kraju završio kao ultrakonzervativac koji koketira s krajnjom desnicom. Valjda misli da mu to donosi opstanak na vlasti, poručuju Orbanovi kritičari.
They are either omnipotent rulers of the country, or they could be subjugated to the judicial procedure, and a lot of them sent to jails. Therefore, for them there is no way, they cannot afford to lose the power, and this resembles very much what kind of power you have in Russia or some Central Asian countries. And Orban knows very well what happened with all those corrupt leaders.
It's very difficult, I think, to believe in the European project when you see that these core values are under threat in the European Union and we pretend everything is okay. No, it's not okay. It's not okay in Hungary. We also see a lot of democracy and rule of law challenges in other EU member states. So as a European and a Hungarian citizen, I would want the EU to be consistent, both when it talks about rule of law and human rights outside the EU, but also when it is inside.
Hungary has about 1% of the EU's GDP, and therefore I think that performance, autocratic performance and aggressive performance of Orban could be very useful at the same time, because it confronts the EU with the necessity to change the decision-making mechanism instead of a unanimous vote system towards a qualified majority system. Other way, the EU won't survive. Orban is strong because the EU is a democratic institution. And of course, some people are speaking that whether Orban wants to leave the EU, but I do not think, because he has the value for Russia, for China, until he is within the EU.
If you look at the story of the funds for Ukraine, those 5 billion euros, he was fighting to get a little, those are 10 billion euros were frozen for Hungary, and he finally got a deal with the European Commission that, okay, I will abstain, I will not vote against the Ukrainian agenda, but but you will give me those 10 million or billion euros that were frozen. So that's how he operates. He is always creating conflicts around him, and he tries to conquer. Even the smallest victory is important for him, because his propaganda machine can exaggerate it and say that we, the small 10 million Hungarians, could force the EU, which are 300 million, on their knees because we are so smart, we are so aggressive, and we outsmarted them.
Na domaćoj fronti Orbanu bi probleme mogao stvoriti novi igrač u političkoj areni, biznismen Peter Mađar, bivši suprug žrtvovane Orbanove ministrice pravosuđa, čovjek koji je godinama bio dio režima. Uz desetke tisuća ljudi na ulici intenziviraju se prosvjedi u Budimpešti, koja od 2019. ionako ima oporbenog gradonačelnika. Mađar, koji izlazi na europske i općinske izbore, osniva pokret Ustanite Mađari i poručuje Orbanu: promjena koja je krenula u Mađarskoj ne može se zaustaviti.
This is a very interesting and very important question. So, are there any chance for the government to be removed democratically through elections? This is basically your question, right? And I think there is. So this is the most important difference between Hungary and Russia. I don't believe that in Russia you can remove Mr. Putin from office through elections.
The chances to change this government, which means to change the regime by elections, are very small. But at the same time, even during the 56 revolutions, even 2 days before the revolution, nobody thought that it could happen.
It's very obvious that a lot of the Hungarians have burnt out, that they feel like their voice doesn't matter and whatever they do doesn't matter. There is also an atmosphere of fear. A lot of people think that speaking out on public discourse may get them fired or may get them demoted, especially if they work in a ministry or an institution that is close to the government or to the state.
There will be the EP election, which Orban will win, I think, right now. It's evident if you take a look on the polls that maybe even 50% of the votes will go to his party, which will be a disaster for the future of the Hungarian opposition. And on the other hand, if you take on the take a look on the municipalities, because in Hungary the EP elections and the municipality elections will be on the same day, and there is no breakthrough success for the Hungarian opposition.
Hungary would deserve much better, but I think they will cling to power at with every move. Otherwise, they would have to go to jail because they have embezzled so much money. There is all around corruption. That's almost government policy. So for them, there is no way out. I don't see a nice future for Hungary, to tell you the truth.
What Hungarian democracy would need is very active citizens who believe in their own agency, who are not apathetic, but are basically ready to form communities to drive a democratic agenda. In a very polarized society as we have now, where there's a lot of political apathy, this is a key challenge. And everything that drives political participation and political dialogue is important now. So this is why we need a free media, why we need more political pluralism, why we need an effective, vibrant civil society.
U posljednjih 14 godina Orbanove vlasti puno se puta kolo sreće okrenulo, uvijek na njegovu stranu. Kada je krajem prošle godine u mađarskom parlamentu potvrđen zakon o obrani suvereniteta, Orban je na platformi X napisao kako Mađarska pripada Mađarima i da se o njezinoj sudbini neće odlučivati u inozemstvu. Čeka nas zanimljivih 6 mjeseci mađarskog predsjedanja Europskom unijom.